Everybody, how's everybody doing today?
Hey there, welcome, and thank you for tuning in to MindMineTV with Evin and Tatiana as we take on Serious Talk Saturday. So this is a new time slot actually. We usually do our main talk show on Wednesdays, and we decided to shake things up a little bit, move it to a day hopefully that's a little bit more convenient for everyone that wants to catch it. So we've moved it to Saturday, 1 p.m. PDT, which is Pacific Daylight Time, and we'll see how this goes. So again, thank you for joining us today. If you're working and lurking in the background, or you're just kind of hanging out and decided to kind of stumble across us, thank you so very much. Or if you're one of our main community members coming back and saying, hey, what's up, and eating your plantain chips or whatever else and hanging out with us, thank you so very much. We really appreciate it. We have some awesome topics for you today, and what we're really excited about is the fact that two of these topics or core subjects were brought to us by one of our own community members, being Vargala, who's in our chat today. And why that's so awesome is that we want to create a talk show, a discussion that is based on the people that watch us. We want to give you content that you care about and actually create discussions. This isn't a news broadcast where we're just like, well, this is the news. This will cause cancer. This will explode. These things happen, blah, 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 which we'll get more into, actually. We do talk about news today. But we actually want to create a discussion. We want to figure out what is going on in this world through left brain topics and right brain topics, as well as show that a lot of times there's plenty of overlap. It's not a clear black and white situation, and really get a true discussion going. And ideally, we're not going to connect on everything, right? All of us in this chat and watching and here involved with this show, we're all not going to agree on every single topic or end goal of each topic. But the goal is to hear the other side, understand the different avenues or pathways, ways of thinking that people take to get to a certain conclusion in order to better understand it. Now, at the end of the discussion, that does not mean that you have to agree still with the other side. What it means is that you could better understand it and maybe even then bring up a better debate against it then and go, well, I finally get what you're saying, but here are these discussion points, and really get a conversation going, because I think too many people get caught up in folk psychology. They get caught up in just this initial, well, this belongs in this, and this is my point of view because it belongs in this kind of category, or what have you. Or if they're looking at a political spectrum or a religious spectrum or whatever, it's very hard to really take a look at the information there, the information provided. And so we want to take away all of those restrictions and just look at the core facts and actually discuss them. And I think that's what gets me so amped up and excited about these talk shows, is that we get to do that. We get to do that with all of you. Now, we bring in, of course, a Western perspective, a U.S. perspective for the most part, though Tatiana does have her roots from Romania. And, I have roots from here, but from different parts, right? I've lived in the Midwest, I've lived on the East Coast, I've lived on the West Coast, but overall it is Westernized. And so what's great is that we get people from all over the world that come into our chat and join us every single week, and they share their thoughts too. And a lot of times they're like, I didn't know that actually existed in your country. That's really interesting. Or that way of thinking, or I didn't realize that was a service or a company in your culture. That's really interesting, and how that works and functions. And so really, when you look at the show, it's not just about, people from the U.S. talking to people from the U.S., but really just getting a, certain perspective out to everyone, and really growing this into a more international discussion over time. And I think that's absolutely amazing that we have that ability to do that here on Twitch and also through our talk show on iTunes as well as Podbean. So that's really exciting. So thank you all of you also who are listening to the podcast, which comes out every Monday. Thank you again, and make sure again to follow or subscribe, and that way you get notified whenever these podcasts come out, full access to them. You can download them, check them out anytime you want, no matter where you're at.
And if YouTube is more of your fancy, which I know I fancy it as well, sadly so. We are also putting out this podcast and this live stream out as a video on YouTube every Tuesday as well. So you can catch it there as well. You can also subscribe to our YouTube and catch some other types of content that we create specifically for YouTube as well, that you're not going to see on Twitch and you're not going to hear about on Podbean or iTunes as well.
Absolutely.
So lots of places. And hello everybody in chat. How is everybody doing? Need more conversations and less arguments, Mongo says. Yes, agreed. Agreed. And healthy debate. You know, healthy debate is good. That works.
All right. And also for those listening, you can catch us live on Twitch and join the conversation every Saturday now, almost said Wednesday, every Saturday now at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, which is twitch.tv/MindMineTV. Come join the conversation. Come get involved and chat with us and share your thoughts. Because again, we want this to be more of a conversation than just us talking at you. Now, talking about subjects, what are we talking about today? Well, we have 4 core topics that we're really excited about. One is, what if age is nothing but a mindset? You know, we hear about people saying, oh, well, you're getting older. Well, as you get older, this is going to happen. You're going to feel this way. Is that 100% true? We're going to dive into that. Also, could no news actually be good news? Again, we hear about, well, this is happening. Oh my God, everything's going to, to hell in a handbasket. This is what you need to pay attention to. Do we really need to pay attention to it? Are there certain things we can do without? We'll talk about that. Also, what is the legalization of cannabis looking like in the US, and what are the current obstacles that it's facing? We've talked a little bit about this when it came to the fires in California and how the marijuana farmers or the cannabis farmers could not get insurance and some of the hardships they went through because of this weird situation that the cannabis industry is in. So we'll kind of touch base on that and elaborate more, though, on the overall within the U.S. And then finally, we're going to be talking about what is going on with over-sexualized characters in video games. What is actually happening here? We see it more and more, especially with more games coming from places like Japan and South Korea and all other parts of the world. We're seeing this over-sexualization. So what is actually going on here? What's the marketing behind it? What are people's thoughts behind it? And what are our thoughts specifically? We're going to share that with you as well. And also, welcome, Denise. Thank you so much for joining us today. And also, Denungi, thank you so very much, as well as for the bits, which is a way of tipping or donating here on Twitch to help support the podcast and the stream overall. So thank you very much. We really do appreciate that.
And then, did you mention the last topic as well?
Yes, about the video games?
Yes, okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Had a little moment there. Had a little age moment there. What if age is nothing but a mindset? Just give me wrinkles all the time. Had that song ready to go. Had that song.
Very nice. Very
nice. Thank you. For those of you that know where that those
it's
types
hit the
of
Billboard charts.
That melody. The Twitch Billboard charts.
That's right, exactly. Only here live on Twitch. The best of Tatiana.
All right, so what if age is nothing but a mindset? In 1981, a young psychologist named Ellen Langer actually ran an interesting study. So she had 8 men who were in their 70s live in what essentially was a time warp. They stayed at a converted monastery in New Hampshire for 5 days.
Did they have to watch Rocky Horror Picture Show?
Doing the time warp. No, I don't know that song, so I can't. I can't even start to sing it, but
at least you got the reference.
But I know it. Yeah.
I'm happy about that. Okay.
I was thinking about that when I was reading the story. Actually, I was like, Time Warp. Hey, that show. Well, I guess it was a film.
It was a film, yeah, and a play.
And a play.
A musical, to be more specific. There we go.
A play with a musical, if you will. So they stayed at a converted monastery in New Hampshire for 5 whole days. And they were surrounded by things designed to actually conjure up 1959 for them. So this was in 1981. So 1959 was over 20 years prior to the date of the study. And the things that they had in that monastery were like black and white TVs that actually showed and ran the shows of the time. They had the clothes of that time period, the books, the magazines. They talked about the current events of that particular time period. And before their arrival, the men actually underwent some physical assessments like dexterity, flexibility, as well as like memory and cognition tests. They did all of these assessments to see, okay, what were they like before entering the study, of course. And then they were told to remember, to not only remember the 1950s, but to actually inhabit that era, to attempt to actually be the person that they were over 20 years ago. And they were also treated as if they were younger. They had to actually move all of their belongings by themselves. And they were told, hey, even if you have to move up, your shirt one by one up the stairs, like you got to do it by yourself because you're 20 years younger. And they had to discuss, again, the current events of the era and speak of the 1950s as if it was the actual present, not just like kind of reminiscing about it. And at the end of their stay, they were tested again on the same assessments, same measurements that they were tested on before they entered this monastery. And the results were incredible. They literally physically sat taller. They had greater dexterity. Miraculously, some of them, actually, their sight improved. And it was amazing. And there was a control group, another set of men in their 70s that were told to just reminisce about the 1950s, but weren't inhabiting them, weren't treated as if they were younger. And there was no improvement in their physical or mental health as a result. Meanwhile, the first 8 men who had basically lived as if they were younger, the experiment essentially put their mind in an earlier time. And their bodies went along for the ride, which is incredible. The study was actually replicated in 2010 by the BBC, of course, for a TV show with 6, quote, aging former celebrities, unquote.
Oh my God, it's like Big Brother or Survivor or something like that.
Yes. And they were the subjects, and 1975 was their time warp. And after a week, they had the same mind-blowing results. People walked taller. Even one person who had initially arrived at the house in a wheelchair walked away just with a cane. Again, hopefully this wasn't done just for show, but if those results weren't skewed for television, they mirror what Langer had found in 1981. Now, Langer had previously done, several studies involving elderly patients, and in one, she found that nursing home residents who had already exhibited early stage of memory loss were actually able to do better on memory tests when they were given the incentives to remember. Basically, she kind of showed that, in a lot of cases, indifference in elderly patients is actually being mistaken for brain deterioration. They just don't have an incentive to remember things, and so they don't, right? But when they were given incentives to remember, they performed wonderfully. And in another, which is this other study is actually considered a classic of social psychology, Langer gave houseplants to 2 groups of nursing home residents. Now, she told the first group that they were responsible for keeping the plant alive, and then they could also make choices about their schedules during the day. So she gave them a lot of power and freedom in a way. She told the other group, that the second group, that the staff would care for the plants. They were still their plants, but the staff would care for the plants, and they didn't have any choice in their daily schedules. 18 months later, twice as many people in the first group, the one that had the plants, had to take care of them, had control over their schedules for the day, twice as many in that group were still alive than in the control group.
Interesting.
So Langer kind of came to think that, what people really needed to heal themselves was what she called a psychological prime. And we're not talking about Amazon Prime, we're not talking about Twitch Prime, we're not talking about Frost Prime and other primes. But
so they couldn't get a free subscription or something.
No, but I mean they could if they were given that choice.
It was an option.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But the psychological prime is something that triggers the body to take curative or healing measures all by itself. All right, basically saying that the mind is a powerful tool, especially over your own body. And lots of other psychiatrists and scientists and researchers have lauded Langer for her beliefs, right? Jeffrey Rediger, who's a psychiatrist and the medical and clinical director of McLean, which is a program of Harvard's McLean Hospital, said that Langer, quote, really gets it. Basically, that health and illness are much more rooted in our minds and in our hearts and how we experience ourselves in the world, more so than anybody could really believe before. And this also makes sense when you look at how PTSD affects a person, right? Their mind is, for lack of a better term, in a different place, right, in many senses, and their body goes along for a ride, for better or for worse. So Langer had become, convinced that not only are most people also led astray by, we're led astray by our own biases, right? But we're also, and I quote, spectacularly inattentive to what's going on around us, right? They're just not there, as she puts it. And when you're not there, Langer reasoned, you're just very likely to end up where you are being led, whether that's your mind leading you there or other people. So she actually set up a number of studies to show how people's thinking and behavior can easily be manipulated with, the subtle priming, this something that triggers the body to do something. And we'll actually talk a little bit about that too later on in the episode of some of the other things that prime us in a particular manner. So basically, a little bit of the takeaway from this, from her experiments and what she believes, is that, if people could learn to be more mindful and perceive the choices that are available to them, they would actually fulfill their potential. They would improve their health. And she's not talking about this like mindful meditation that's sort of trending everywhere on social media right now. You go out on a lake and you zen out and you're like, yes, clear my mind of things. She's not talking about that. Her emphasis is on noticing the moment-to-moment changes around you. From the differences in the face of your spouse across the breakfast table, to the variability of your asthma symptoms. Like, you're noticing what is happening around you. So it's not so much to disconnect yourself and breathe in and not think about anything, but it's really actually being in the moment, making observations and seeing what's happening right now and allowing yourself to be in the present. You're not in your mind necessarily somewhere else, or making the choices to be in a somewhere else that is positive to you, hopefully. Because when we're actively making new distinctions rather than relying on habits, right? Habitual things that we do, or we assume that, okay, when I look at my cat, she's probably going to want food. Well, maybe sometimes the cat is sick, and you need to be able to recognize when your cat is sick versus she just wants food based on like the meowing or something, right? When we're actively looking at that and making choices and looking at our options, then we're actually alive. And when we feel alive, we feel younger.
Well, yeah, what basically this is saying then is find importance in the things around you. Don't A, take them for granted, or two, don't also lessen them any in your mind. instead of going, oh, well, this doesn't matter anymore, especially because I'm old or because I'm, this or that, go, well, no, this is still important to me, and let that energize you. Let that make you feel happy or feel something at least. When you become dead to the things around you, when you become dead to the world, eventually you are just really just dead, and that does have a huge impact on your mind, on the psychology of you. And when you start making things around you less important, you become less important to yourself as well. You're not getting as many connections to the things around you. And because we are such social creatures, we have to find connections to the things around us. Otherwise, it's like we don't really exist. And there are plenty of films and books and whatnot that actually hit on that very idea of what happens when you are completely disconnected from the rest of the world and from the things around you. What does a person actually feel and go through? What is their perspective on it in comparison to someone else? And we've mentioned this kind of phenomenon before of people looking at the same thing, but they view it differently. And again, we see this in topics all the time, right? You just look at politics. One side says, well, this is good for you. The other side says, no, it's terrible for you. And this is good for you. But even in just looking at something, we take in and register with our minds colors in a different way.
Oh, yeah.
We could perceive that differently. We could perceive someone's actions very differently. Oh, well, maybe they're just more timid. No, they're up to no good. There's all these different things that we take in through like folk psychology and just what we're given, what we're born with a lot of times too. There's much of it that is also just science-based outside of psychology overall and just based on what we were born with, what we were given, what we're working with for tools here. And so it's really interesting to go that, okay, once you start giving someone a reason again, or a purpose, or structure again, and they don't feel so lost, that they could do so much more with themselves. And especially with these people with the plants that you mentioned, again, they had an action, and they knew that something's livelihood depended on them. And therefore, it strove to get their brain thinking again in a certain way. Many people do this with pets, too. A lot of times people say, well, pets make you live longer. There's, multiple studies that have said that as well. And I think, personally, the reason for that is, again, because it gives you purpose. It reminds you that you are doing something of value for someone or something. And that your actions do have an impact, whether positive or negative, they still have an impact. And it's important to understand and register that rather than just to ignore that factor and feel like you're just kind of floating in this kind of bubble and everyone else is just kind of zipping by you, basically.
Right. And I think this also ties in with, people who retire, right? And if they feel like they don't have another purpose, they don't have a hobby they can pick up, or, they view retirement as like, great, I'm going to go and hang out on the beach all day long. But that doesn't give them necessarily a purpose to fulfill. And especially if they're used to having a work purpose, right? And then that's taken away from them. It's hard for some people who retire to actually lead happy rest of their lives because they're always looking for somebody else to vicariously live through, right? Like maybe they'll hang out with some of their children or grandchildren. But then but if they're not there, they don't feel useful anymore. There's a lot of people who have said that when they retire, they just sort of feel useless. And it's very important to, have, I guess, in a nutshell, have a reason for living, but also believe that you are living, and not just sort of going through the motions of living.
Well, I think, unfortunately, some of it is based on our society, at least since I would say at least since like the 1920s, 30s, 40s, whenever industry started picking up and what was important all of a sudden was becoming successful through money. So what you had to do, of course, was, work. You got to work to get to the next plateau, to get to the next plateau, to get to the next plateau. And, it takes years of that psychology being beat into you. And then all of a sudden, though, how quickly is it to retire? it's pretty quick, right? You could just say, okay, I'm the right age, I'm going to retire. And you get the plans in motion and you go. I mean, again, there's a couple things you have to work out with your company, blah, blah, blah.
And hopefully you have some savings a little bit and everything like that.
Exactly. But overall, if you look at it, though, it makes sense. Like, this has been beaten into us for decades already that, okay, there's always got to be this next thing. What are you working up to next? What are you working up to next? All right, be useful, do something, get off your butt and do something, this kind of whole push. And then all of a sudden you get to the point of retirement and you're like, well, what now? What happens now? What is that next thing? Because I'm not working, so I'm not making money from the work that I do. I could go back to work. I could work for a flower shop or do something else random. But all that does is really feel like busy work then. So right. What else can I put in order to feel like I'm giving value to something? And I think that mindset is hard to break because you've had it for decades already. So then, yeah, it makes sense that there's this clear shift in brain chemistry and how you view the world and view yourself in that world.
Yeah, and I think our society especially also puts like a stigma on people who are older or retired or both because they're looking at them as if somehow they aren't any like useful any longer, or right. I can get somebody else who can do the job 3 times as faster at half the cost or something like that, right? Which is ridiculous because now we're also reinforcing this bizarro view of older people as if, oh yeah, you're done. You reach a certain age, boom, it's like expired food. It's like that's not that's not true. And who picks this arbitrary age, like obviously, as you get older, certain parts of your body slow down, need a little bit more maintenance, if you will, but at the same time, how much of that is because of what you believe in yourself, right? I mean, we've seen people who are in their 70s, in their 70s and 80s who are very fit. They're probably more healthy than I am. They're more active. They have a great social life. They're doing all these stuff for their community. Like they're a thriving, living individual. And then I know people who are in their 20s who are doing not much else, and worse, don't want to. Are somehow, quote unquote, deluding themselves that this is it. This is the end all be all. And that is sad because, you cannot give up on your mind at any age. But especially, when it's been shown in so many different kinds of studies that your mind is a powerful tool.
Oh, yeah. And to go off of what Mongo actually says in chat, which is this kind of relates to the whole stress gives you gray hairs thing. Changing or even just taking time to look at your mindset can change your mindset, give you purpose for a healthier mind and body. So to go off of that, again, a lot of people make excuses too, and they say, oh, well, that person at the age of 60 or 70 is still weightlifting and doing all this stuff. But that's just good genes. And it's like that does have some to play in this whole process. I give it that. But a lot of it too is mindset. A lot of it is also diet and then actual exercise. What has this person been doing for 60, 70 years physically? And what have they been eating for the past 40, 50 years? Because over time, certain foods, certain things sit in our body and tend to impact it later on in life. These people are the ones that haven't been too gluttonous, for example, taking all these different kinds of fats or weird, chemicals, artificial this and that. And so, yeah, they're not seeing effects like, 5 years in from eating it. But over time, this stuff can still be hard for our bodies to break down. And that does have an impact in the long term. So you have to think about, what have they been putting into themselves? What have they been surrounding themselves around? Again, people who live in the city tend to live less a lot of times than people out in rural areas.
Oh, interesting.
Because you have to think about things like exhaust emissions and things that you're constantly breathing in and being surrounded by. And a lot of those people don't take time out to slow down a lot of times as well, because a lot of times in the city, everyone's in the rush. I'm trying to get here, but you're in my way. I'm trying to get there, but you're in my way. And so it's a constant struggle, and that can also induce a lot of stress, especially for those people that are very empathetic, who then, feed off those emotions and then start exhibiting those very emotions as well.
That's true. That's true. It's sort of like you're bringing in a little bit of trash into your house, right? And over time, like, you can put it in the trash cans, and then the trash cans get filled. So then you buy new trash cans, and then you hide them in a closet, and then you're like, right, over time, you're not going to necessarily see all the trash, but you might start to smell the trash. But you do that long enough, and you don't take that trash out, eventually it's going to overrun your house, and then you're going to be like, why does my house look terrible and smell bad? Well, because you haven't really been putting in, cleaning it, doing some maintenance.
Exactly.
Thinking about it.
And that's the same for the body. That's the same for the mind. You know, you put enough crap into your body, consuming it, that'll do that effect. If you think enough with these toxic thoughts,
yes,
or this lack of connection to the world around you, to induce, you know, depressive ideas and thoughts and feelings, over time, that will also, again, consume you. And now for some people, you can't control it, right? In the sense of, like, say, depression, anxiety, things like that. Those are just there, right? And you work with them the best you can. But then the goal is then to take the measures you need to, or the steps forward that you need to help alleviate some of that stress or some of that depression that you could take on. So figuring out what works for you, knowing that it's important and that you are important to take those steps and to do it. And that's where you're doing the right thing. It's inaction that can be the worst action, if that makes sense.
Right. It's the lack of action that can hurt you the most sometimes.
Absolutely. Exactly right.
Especially when it comes to your own life, right? I mean, you are the orchestrator and the architect of your own life. And the more that you realize that, and the more that you train yourself to believe it as the truth that it is, the better you'll be off, we think. And that's why you recycle, Vargala says. Exactly. Recycle your mind. Yeah, give it a little bit of a spin every now and again. You know, sit down with yourself. And this is where, you know, the mindful meditation that is trending on social media nowadays and in people's lives does come into play. You know, it's sort of like you have to defragment your computer every now and again. You got to sit down with yourself every now and again and just say, hey, how you doing today? What's going on? Let me take stock of what's happening with myself, with my body, with my mental health, with my physical health.
Well, and mindfulness is very important as long as you have the right mindset to the mindfulness, right?
Oh,
so
double whammy.
It depends on what you plan on doing. Like, what is your end goal? Like, if you think that just sitting there and meditating and whatever you think meditation is going to help you with all these different diseases, ailments, whatever it may be, it probably won't work for you as well as someone who goes into it going, okay, well, what my goal is just to clear my mind, just to slow down and relax in this moment, hear sounds, you know, feel the ground underneath me, you know, do those really specific things to just kind of slow down and remind yourself. There's a big difference. So mindfulness can be really good, but unfortunately, when it tends to become super trendy or catchy, people tend to try it not really understanding why they're doing it or what the benefits are, and then end up doing it incorrectly, I guess is the best way of putting it. And so they don't really get the benefits from it. Like yoga is a huge craze a lot of times, depending on where you go. But a lot of people don't understand the actual core of what yoga is and why you do it. And they're just like, well, I'm just going to yoga class, you know, and I've got to look good. Got to match my yoga mat with everything else. You know, but not actually understanding why is it good for you? What are you doing for it? And then understanding the actual, you know, little processes within it that makes it important.
Yeah, and that's a great point as well. I actually bought when MTV, long time ago, came out with like a MTV yoga video. And it was like, you know, catchy modern music with some VJ or another and a yoga instructor. And they had a few people, you know, obviously in the background doing yoga.
That were the actual professionals.
And I watched that video and I bought my little matching mat with my little matching outfit, and I was in my house and I did the things, and I was like, I don't understand it. But it made me feel good because, one, I was actually doing some exercise, which I had never done before. And it was an exercise where it had a, you know, it was like a easy entry, right? Easy barrier to entry there. But then I actually took a yoga class, and it was so different. It was the same moves, but like I had been holding my body not in the right exact correct pose, and like what I thought, was a particular difficulty level wasn't. And having that instructor actually show me and explain to me what was actually happening, by the time I went back to that video and I was doing it at my house, I had a much better understanding of what I was doing and much better effect on me from doing that as well. So that's a good point.
And I just want to read in chat too. Vargala says, bad mental image of Evin in yoga pants. You're welcome, everyone.
I don't know. It's a pretty good mental image.
I don't even want that image. What are you talking about? I don't even want to see me in yoga pants.
There's so many different kinds though nowadays. Everybody's selling them. Everybody's doing their own fashion line. Like Kate, was it Kate Hudson?
That wouldn't surprise me.
I think she's doing one.
But, like everyone and their mother's wearing them, and they don't even freaking do yoga.
Oh yeah, right. That's just called because they're so comfortable though. If you get good comfortable yoga pants, like I'm on board. Speaking of ingesting negative things,
like a picture of me in yoga pants.
News. Can no news actually be good news? It turns out that news may actually be bad for you, and giving up like reading it or watching it can actually maybe make you happier. Now, we do want to note that we're talking a little bit more about mainstream news, not so much, actual investigative journalism that spans 15 articles, 2 books, 3 TV shows, right? We're talking about these like snippets of news that are like fire here, earthquake there, Wall Street crash, like, things that are meant to overall induce and elicit a particular emotion, and that emotion is often negative.
Exactly, like, is your cat currently trying to suffocate you? Look over your left shoulder now. Huh? Wait, I don't even own a cat. What the hell?
Now, and we were just talking about how negativity can affect us, right? And we know, for example, that an overabundance of food can affect us negatively, right? Not just like, oh, I have to lose 10 to 15 pounds, but it can lead to obesity and diabetes. And because food nowadays, especially in the US and some other countries, is so easy to attain, it is easy to get an overabundance of it, right? So some people have started to change their diets and try to curb some of this overabundance of food because they know that it can lead to negative effects. Now, news is to our mind what sugar is to our body, in a sense, right? That is, little news tidbits, they're so easy to digest, right? The media puts forth like small bites of trivial matter, tidbits that don't really concern our lives and don't require a lot of thinking, right? Unlike a book or really long magazine articles that require us to think. News flashes, they're short, they're bright colored candies for the mind. And I quote that from the Guardian article. They don't saturate our brains the way that other content can. And large quantities of this type of brain candy can actually be toxic to us, right? And how is it? How is it bad for us? I mean, it's not really like candy, right? I'm not actually putting something in my body. Here's how. First, news misleads, right? And it's largely irrelevant to you, right? The media, mainstream media, they show us a little frame and they put in that frame what they want to emphasize, right? The facts that they want to emphasize. And it's not necessarily the important or the relevant matters, right? There could be a story about a man driving a motorcycle over a bridge. The bridge gets destroyed, and the man destroys something with his motorcycle, and oh my God, he's a terrorist, and this and that. The news is going to focus on that. Well, what about the fact that the bridge fell? Like, the infrastructure of the bridge is destroyed, right? Like, you don't necessarily hear about that because that might be not that important in eliciting, widespread panic. Something like that. Now, and think of this. Out of the 10,000 different news stories that you have read in the last year, right? Name like one story that truly allowed you to make an important decision about a serious matter in your own life or business. And we're talking again about these like news tidbits, right? Now, the truth is that news as presented by the mainstream media is largely irrelevant to you in your daily life. Largely. Election results notwithstanding.
Well, a lot of bits, of course, are meant to grab your attention right away. They're selling, basically. It's a lot of marketing because they need viewers, because ideally they get advertiser money, and the more viewers they have for longer, the more they can charge their advertisers in order to, again, make money, pay all the people that work on the productions and everything else, because you yourself do not actually pay for them. You may pay for a cable package, but that money's going toward the cable company, not directly toward CBS, ABC, MSNBC, Fox News, you name it.
Exactly. And the same thing goes for online news sources, right? Some of the same bigger companies, they're getting ad revenue now from their websites. So, of course, they want to bring in a lot of people and they want to, keep you there. And what's going to keep your attention? New things. Right? Not necessarily relevant things, but rather like, oh, here's another thing. Oh, here's another thing. Oh, click over here. Here, click over here. And all of a sudden, like 50 hours later, you've gone down this like rabbit hole. Now, news is also physically toxic to you. It constantly is, it's designed to trigger your limbic system. Like panic stories actually spur the release of cortisol. And yes, we all know cortisol. Stress brings on floods of it, right? So that screws up your immune system and inhibits the release of growth hormones. In other words, your body, by reading all these news and listening to all these little news segments, it constantly finds itself in a state of chronic stress. And like, we have enough of that, thank you very much. Just living our lives. And, high cortisol levels cause impaired digestion, nervousness, susceptibility to infections. You name it. Stress is bad. And the other potential side effects, which we also see by somebody who's just constantly watching the news, right? The other side effects are fear, aggression, tunnel vision, and desensitization, right? Like all of a sudden, just hearing about all this stuff on the news all the time, you sometimes lose track of they're talking about real people. They're talking about real issues. Things are happening that are bigger than the snippet, the frame that you're shown, right? And news increases cognitive errors. Basically, news feeds the mother of all cognitive errors, and that's confirmation bias.
Oh, yeah, and there's been plenty, especially just look at politics. We actually talked about confirmation bias in the sense of YouTube, how a lot of those videos that side with one side to the other tend to get pushed to you more because the algorithm looks at, well, what do you like? Great, I'm only going to show you that then. So what happens is a lot of people during, especially the political season, they will start looking up all these different videos, whether from the left, the right, the middle, the up, the down, whatever it is, whatever direction you're in for politics. And it will keep feeding you that. And whether it's right or wrong, you'll keep getting shown those videos. And then you start getting this, kind of concept of like, oh, well, yeah, see, look, all this news that's flooding me right now, and I'm sure flooding everyone else the same, right? That they're agreeing with what I'm saying, so, or what I'm thinking, or, one video told me how to think, and then these 5 other videos are supporting it, so it must be true, rather than actually looking at the fact of, wait a minute, this is a little too good to be true here. Hold on. There's got to be another side to the story. And so, yeah, it's very easy to also get this confirmation bias that happens. You're looking for anything that you can agree with. And you go, see, that makes me right, because no one wants to be wrong.
Right.
Unless you're an entrepreneur where they say, hey, it's actually good if I fail because I learn from it and I get back up, right? It's crazy. But even then, a lot of entrepreneurs that I know, if it had to do with anything besides their own business, they'd be like, oh, no, I'm right. No, I'm not a fail. No, I'm, yes, he agrees with me. It's like, then we start creating, we start creating our own confirmation biases and are like, well, No, I mean, in this way, you know, it makes sense that I, you know, agreed with the fact of being wrong. But here, no. We're so selective. It's insane. So especially when you have news feeding it to you and feeding you very selective parts of information, not saying they're not true, but how they're worded, how they're displayed, how they're showcased. Again, you can look at a title too of an article. If you actually read the article, you go, wait a minute, what the hell does this article really have to do with that title? You know, the title says, hey, this thing will kill you.
Clickbait.
And then you click on it and you read the article, and all of a sudden the article says, well, I mean, some people believe that this could kill you. Okay, well, I'm glad that people believe, but I'm coming to you as a news source, ideally, because you have actual facts. You have resources, right? Saying this will kill me. And what you're saying is, so-and-so's second cousin twice removed once had someone that supposedly died from this thing. And you're like, what the hell is going on? I could have done a story like that. Like, there's no backing. There's no real substance to it, but there's always a spin because, one, it got you to click. It got you to look at it because there's something in you that you agreed with or something inside of you that spoke to an inner fear that you have or to an inner insecurity. And it fed on that and pulled you in.
And we actually talked in a previous episode about how YouTube's algorithm of showing you, like, you know, here's the next video to watch after you finish this one video, kind of has that confirmation bias, you know, it's all up on it. It's just going to show you more and more of those videos. So you're not really going to get a different viewpoint.
Exactly.
You know, and Warren Buffett actually said, quoted as having said, you know, what the human being is best at doing is interpreting all new information so that their prior conclusions remain intact. which is to say, I'm gonna pick and select what I want to hear because it matches what I already believe.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It happens all the time.
So news really just makes us prone to overconfidence, taking stupid risks, and misjudging any opportunities that might present themselves, you know. News is like a drug that wastes our time. It's like good and bad.
and I want to clarify too, because I don't think this article does a great job of it. Not that I'm judging this person's journalism and writing, because I'm sure they're a far better writer than I am. But, you know, they mention news, and so you could spin that one way or the other, right? Because, again, we look at the same word, we look at the same concept, and we could take away different things from it. So what this person is specifically saying in this Guardian article is it's not news as in the sense of information, but news as in the sense of the industry and how that industry regurgitates information to us. That's what they're really hitting on. So they're not saying that you should never know what's going on around you, that you should never be engaged with information that does impact you or your family's life or your friend's life or anything like that. What they're saying is that take it with a grain of salt because of how it's distributed out to you, because of how it's written, because of how it's handled and then displayed to you. You know, it's like basically it's basically like going to a retail store, looking at all of these nice shiny things, objects and stuff, and they have the right lighting on it and the labels and colors, and then actually going to the stock room. Those are two very different setups, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
The stock room is the core information. It's like everything's boxed up, taped up. You know, probably has like a layer of dust on it because it's been sitting on a back shelf for God knows how long.
God.
And then, you know, they unbox it, they take it out, they sit it on the shelf and make it look pretty. And then, you know, what we see on TV or in a lot of these online publications is that storefront. But what we're not seeing is the stock room, and that's actually where the real information lies.
True that. I like that analogy. Though now I'm afraid to go into stock rooms and actually see what's going on. Although I have to say, I talked with somebody who worked at a McDonald's for a long time, and just hearing about some of the stuff in the back, I was like, oh man. I mean, not that I loved the food before, but you know, I ate it. And then after that, I was like, I don't know if I want to eat it anymore. Now I'm just scared.
Hey, anything like their fries that could survive for 10 years on the bottom of a car and not have any effect, that ain't right. I'm just throwing it out.
But I mean, if the apocalypse comes, that's good. That's where I'm going. That's what I'm eating.
Because it's still good. It's
Yeah,
McDonald's,
it'll still be okay.
the cockroach of the fast food industry.
Echo chamber for the win, Vergala says. Exactly. And that's the other reason why, we like to have our talk show actually, conversing with our audience, because, sometimes it can feel like an echo chamber, although we don't want to agree on everything, the two of us. But it's nice to get another perspective and say, hey, this is what we believe. What do you think? What are your thoughts? What experiences do you have? What do you know that we don't? And so on and so forth. Crazy Talk News that doesn't confirm my biases is #fake news. And right, and so news is like a drug that wastes our time. When stories develop, right, like we wanna know how they continue. Like, we need our fix. Well, what's gonna happen next? Right now, websites have started implementing this, where if something is happening in real time and it's an event that's ongoing, you're gonna get an update every 10 minutes on the website, like it's Twitter or something like that, right? And there's like hundreds of storylines in our brains now, right, in our heads, and so this craving for knowing what's going to happen, or being aware of everything that's happening in the world at all times is compelling, right? It's hard to ignore that need, and we just need to know, right? But we spend 15 minutes reading about it here, and later in the day we spend another 15 minutes reading about it here. And then we spend 15 minutes over there, and then so on and so forth. By the end of the day, we spend hours on, again, what is probably irrelevant, toxic news that we don't need to know to just live our lives and be contributive, productive members of our society. What else could we have been doing in that time, right? And the other thing that happens when we're constantly looking for our next fix of what's happening in the world, is that the more of this kind of bits of news that we consume, the more we actually exercise our brain's neural circuits that are devoted more towards skimming and multitasking than those circuits that are used for reading deeply and thinking with a profound focus and comprehension. So the side effect of that, or the symptom of that, or the resulting effect, is that most news consumers, even if they used to be avid book readers back in the day, have actually lost their ability to absorb lengthy articles or books, right? After 4 or 5 pages, they get tired, the concentration vanishes, and they become restless. And what I hear from a lot of people is I can't even sit through a book. It's what? Why not? Right? What's going on? And it's not because people get older or their schedules are more hectic or complicated. It's literally because the physical structure of how their brain interprets data is changing. It has changed. And that's insane. You're literally changing how your brain works by constantly being bombarded by little news bits. And this is similar to what social media does to us, right? We're constantly little notification here, little 140 character thing here, you're looking at this image, you're sharing this meme, you're doing all sorts of stuff. Your brain is getting better at skimming, briefly glancing at something, and not really sitting down and fully enjoying a longer, lengthier, whether it's an article or a show or even a conversation with a human being, we're just texting with each other, even in real life, even face to face, it can feel like.
Well, our sense of what's important tends to misconstrue a bit, right? Instead of going with what's here and now, we get a little notification, a little ping, we go, oh, that must be important. Because especially when it comes to media outlets, it's their job to provide the news, right? And so if there is no news, what do? You don't have anything to show. Then Right. It feels like you're not doing your job and you're losing viewers. And again, their whole thing is that they have to give you they have to gain viewers for their advertisers. And, what's interesting too is that we're getting very close to not a celebration, but an anniversary actually is what it is. Because as of April 18th, 1930, that's considered the day there was no news.
Oh.
And what that means is that the BBC on April 18th, 1930 announced there was no news worthy of being broadcasted. And so instead of going through with their news on the radio like they usually did at that time, they elected to play a piano concerto. And that was it. So they were just like, there is no news today. And then they went into music, basically like, NPR, where they have that little music special. All of a sudden you hear, classical music and everything going on. They legit were like, hey, at this point in time, you know what's going on. We're not going to repeat. It doesn't make sense to repeat everything you already knew, or know at that point in time. There's just no news. There isn't anything that is worthy of your attention. I mean, we could talk about something that happened in Italy, but again, if you're in London, it won't directly impact you anyway. You may have no interest whatsoever. It's probably very thin chance that you do. And so that was the day where there was no news. And it's coming up very close now as we were rounding out March and going into April. And so I find that interesting because now all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's got to be 24-hour coverage. And we have 24-hour coverage.
Oh, yes. 24-hour coverage.
And we're like, oh, thank God. Now we're protected, even though like 18 hours of it we're not going to watch or pay attention to or more.
Or it's the same story over and over and over again. Like, oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, I actually did a few studies where I just sat while I was working on other projects or things like that. I just have the news running. Like, I'm intrigued on what happens here. And I swear to God, just like with radio, where you get a popular song and they play it basically each hour on the hour, it was the same thing with a lot of the stories. And they were just repeat, and show the same shit over and over again. Or what they would do was they would show one half of a segment they recorded and then showed the second half the second hour. And it just became all this filler. And it really kind of broke that desensitization to the news, or even that sense of maybe putting them on a pedestal and going, they are the all-knowing, like they should be trusted.
Oh, yeah.
You start getting these patterns and you go, what the hell is this? This is all fluff. It's like basically, commercial, same thing regurgitated. Commercial, same thing regurgitated. Or they do that whole spin where they're like, oh, hey, by the way, police officer got, hit by a car. Stay tuned for more updates. You're like, oh, what happened? And they keep it dragging out. 45 minutes go by and they go, oh, well, a car had, lightly brushed up against the police officer today, but he's okay. He didn't even have to go to the hospital. Why were you putting so much emphasis? And this is a real story, actually. This is based on something that actually happened when we were in Boston on one of their news channels, where they were pushing the fact that this police officer got ran over during a traffic stop. Oh, my God. And they were like, oh, well, the side mirror brushed up against him, but it was one of those foldable ones, so it just pushed in. The police officer is fine. I'm just like, why? I mean, that's still scary as shit. Like, I'm not, saying it's not. But the fact that you put so much emphasis to it, we're expecting like, oh, and it killed him, or he's in the hospital, and
something even worse,
traction or something. And it wasn't. It was just like, yeah, he's fine.
Yeah,
everything's cool.
It's good. Yeah, they're masters. The news media, mainstream news media is a master at saying nothing in 1 hour. It feels like sometimes. And you brought up really good points. News basically inhibits our thinking, and it makes us a little bit more passive in our lives, and kills our creativity. Like, news stories are like you're mentioning, the news story about Italy or Spain or something like that, right? Like, news stories tend to be overwhelmingly tend to be about things that we directly cannot influence. Like, I can't go and protest in Italy to change something. I can barely do it here, and this daily repetition of news about things that we can't act upon makes us passive, right? It basically grinds us down until we adopt a worldview that is pessimistic. It is desensitized, right? There's actually a scientific term for this, and that's learned helplessness. It's just like, oh man, there's all this shit that's going down. You can't do crap about it. Trust us, though. Or trust this person who paid us for it. Or trust the government. Like, there's ways they could spin that. And you might be saying, like, how does it inhibit thinking overall, though? Because, you can look at news and, like, form your opinions about things and think have deep conversations with your own self or with other people, right? Well, thinking, though, requires concentration. And concentration requires uninterrupted time. And that's key, uninterrupted time. I don't know the last time I've really had uninterrupted time by myself when my phone isn't booping and beeping at me. But news pieces, right? Like, they're specifically engineered to interrupt you, right? They're like viruses that steal your attention. Mm-hmm. And so there's two types of memory, right? There's long-term memory and there's short-term memory. And this interruption of your concentration actually adversely affects your long-term memory, because long-term memory actually has an almost infinite capacity. Like, you could remember all sorts of things for a very long time. But the short-term memory, or what's more commonly known as like working memory, is limited, to a certain amount of data. And that path from short-term memory, something that's kind of stored in your working memory and has to move to long-term memory, there's a little bit of a choke point there in the brain, and anything you want to fully understand later and comprehend and retain for later has to pass through that. And if this passageway gets disrupted, then nothing gets through. And because news, or like these interruptions disrupt your concentration, it actually serves to weaken our comprehension long term, and it hurts our long term memory. And also, the more crap we stick in our brains, just like the more crap we stick in our bodies, and the more crap we stick in our homes, right? We're actually going to be less creative, because creativity actually needs, like a quote wide berth, unquote, in the brain, right? Like this open space in which it can flourish, so that we can come up with like new and novel ideas and brainstorm and do all this other stuff. That's why kids tend to be more creative than adults, because they don't have their brains filled with a lot of crap yet. They can think of new and novel ideas just fine. But the more things that we think that we know, or the more things that we do know, we have less space for actual creativity. So news can really, like these news tidbits, I think it's an amazing, not allegory, that is the wrong term, but like a metaphor or simile, or it's very like social media, I feel like nowadays, and these notifications and this like short, condensed little bits of information that we're constantly bombarded with. It affects how we think and how we process information, and it actually leads us to potentially believe that we don't have as much influence on our own selves and our own lives, because it feels like, well, I can't do stuff about that, I can't do stuff about this. That means I can't do stuff about me either. Which kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with age being just a mindset. When you start to believe that you are helpless in some form or fashion, eventually over time, it feels like you're helpless about everything, and that includes your life as well. And exactly, as Evin mentioned, like we want to emphasize that the person who wrote this article, they're not talking about journalism. They believe that society does need journalism, actual investigative journalism, right?
Exactly.
Like, we need reporting that polices our institutions, uncovers truths. But these important findings don't have to arrive in the form of these like Twitter-sized news bits, Long articles are okay. In-depth books, conversations with people, research, true journalism, not just what the mainstream media is passing and has been for a while, I think, in a lot of countries, passing off as news.
Mm-hmm. Oh, exactly right. Yeah, and actually Crazy Doc makes a great point too. Short-term memory sounds kind of like RAM, goes poof once the machine is turned off.
There you go.
So you gotta have that short-term cache that just kind of holds everything in when you need it at that very point, and then it's gone eventually over time.
Analogy. Thank you, Crazy Doc. Yes. That is the word I was looking for. Do you see what news interruption is doing to my brain?
And it makes a lot of sense, though. Like, there's a lot of times where I get really busy, and, what we do has a lot of creative edge to it, and we try to incorporate the creative to it, too. And a lot of times, though, it can be difficult because you get bombarded by so many to-dos on the to-do list and, different updates and news within your industry and things that you try to keep up with. That a lot of times, what I love to do is just, in order to unplug, is listen to music, go for a walk, do things like that clear out some of that bombardment. Because again, with the news, 24 hours, they've got to hit you every couple of seconds, otherwise they know they've lost you.
Right, and it's always like breaking news about something that happened somewhere else that you cannot change, cannot do anything about, and just feel like, holy shit, I'm so glad it's not me.
Well, and I think that's the thing that really pisses me off, to be honest, about a lot of media outlets, is they say, hey, there's this problem. Okay, so what do we do about it then? If you're such a great resource, what the hell do we do? And a lot of these times, they bring on people from both sides, but they never come to a damn conclusion. They're just like, oh yeah, so this person had points on this side, and this person had points on this side. I guess we'll never know. Thanks for coming in and talking with us today. So moving on to the next thing, and so it's like you never get any sort of conclusion because they don't want that. Keeping you, by keeping you informed, they're keeping you uninformed. Because they're not giving you the full picture. They're not giving you the full sense of, okay, well, this is where we're going. So because we're going in this direction, this is where we will go, which means this will happen. And how do we either get it to go faster or how do we stop it from happening? And like none of that's there.
It's like a TV show that ends on like a
cliffhanger.
Yeah,
exactly right. They don't want to give too much. They don't want to give you the full landing. They've got to keep you amped up. They've got to keep you energized throughout, so that way you're focusing. If you don't have that emotional connection, which a lot of times, the easiest route to go through is through fear, they know they don't have you, and that you'll just end up, going to watch something else that does give you that emotional connection. So they're really trying to compete with things like TV shows, like reality TV shows. So a lot of times too, these media outlets become a reality television episode. They emphasize certain things and they show things in a certain way or a certain spin that helps grab that attention. And they know what they're doing. It's not like they're accidentally doing it. They're doing it on purpose. And it's not to be really malicious as really it is just to get your attention and get paid so they can, turn the lights on the next day. I'm not saying that's the right way of going about it, but that's their thought process too.
Right. So if watching mainstream media kind of sucks, how else can we get news?
Are you asking me?
I am.
Well, so, one of the things I like to do is figure out who the investigative journalists are. Who's been working on in researching and diving into specific subjects for months, for years even. And I figure out who they are, and I start following them, like on social media, for example, or figure out what their websites are. A lot of times these people, because the subjects they hit are not exactly advertiser friendly, a lot of times they run their own blog, or maybe they're just an independent writer for many different publications. So eventually one publication will pick them up outside the US, and another one will pick them up inside the US another time around, depending on the subject. So it's really important to find out who those people are and to start following them, to start engaging with them and see what kind of content they're actually sharing. Greg Palast is a great one when it comes to voting. He has been following voting and all the different issues with the U.S. voting system for decades now. So, what I'll do too is I'll type his name in chat. Feel free to check him out. I believe that's the correct spelling of it, Greg Palast. But he is a great investigative journalist. He has to do most of his work, though, for publications outside the U.S. because, unfortunately, he doesn't get really publicated here in the U.S. unless it's with Rolling Stone for the most part. Because Rolling Stone, again, tries to be a little bit edgier, brings stuff to attention that no one else is willing to for the most part. So that is, I would say, one of the good ways of doing it, and one of the nice things about social media is you can find these people and connect with them. Again, though, it depends on their work. A lot of people now are starting to call themselves independent journalists since the 2016 election, when they have no qualifications for it, and maybe they don't put in the work, but they're trying to get views, they're trying to get hits, they're trying to drive traffic. So it's gotten a little bit harder. You know, the waters have been muddied quite a bit, especially during any election season that will happen. So it can be difficult. You know, I would say too is look at different resources that don't agree with you too, that don't agree with your way of thinking, whether they're blog articles or what have you, and look at those and just judge them too. And I'm not saying that that's going to be reliable news, and that's not where you're going to find, you know, that's not exactly where you're going to find it, but at least you're going to maybe be able to put a better picture together for yourself. Again, if you look at both sides enough, you take enough information in from both sides, ideally you could come up with your own conclusion and in a way be your own investigative journalist. I mean, those are really at this current point two of the best routes for the most part, but it's not an easy process. And no one ever said that trying to get the right information would be an easy process. We naturally get distorted views of reality all the time. It just happens. It's, you know, look at the telephone game that you play as a child.
Oh, God.
You know, as it goes down the chain of command, people interpret things differently, or they intentionally try to change it, or they do something with that information. And all of a sudden it goes from, hey, you know, Susie Q is pretty, to all of a sudden she has 3 kids, she's not married, she's this and that, she's, you know, whatever it is, you know, and she looks like she fell from the ugly tree. I don't know, whatever it is, but like it will get distorted that much. So it's tough. No one said this was a simple process or that it would be easy or that there is a full-blown solution for it, but really you got to put some of the time and effort into it. And, you know, I've been guilty of this too, especially I try to be better with it, is don't just read a title, a headline, and then share it on social media without actually reading the article. Because it's so easy to get caught up and go, yeah, that image, you know, visually states what I think, and then I'm seeing this title. It's, yes, you know, this is definitely something that's important that my connections, my network would want to hear. Because the problem is, like I mentioned previously, you go into that article and you go, wait a minute though, where is the part that they mentioned in the headline? Or no, the headline sells it incorrectly. Like they purposefully did that to get you to click and to get you to share it. Because a lot of people know that too. That's the whole thing. They want something that if you're not going to be putting in the time to read it, they want you to be sharing it.
Right.
They want something that grabs your attention enough where you just have to share it.
Right. Like breaking news. Man in hot yoga pants, and it's like a picture of Evin in yoga pants, and they just share that out. But I don't know what the article says.
But that's hashtag fake news.
Exactly. Well, speaking of more news that may be relevant to your own life, we're going to talk about the spread of marijuana legalization. And there's a very interesting article / it's like 30 mini articles in one on Vox that we'll also be sharing. As with all of our content, we do share our resources both in the description on the YouTube video, in the Podbean and iTunes video audio files. Video files, you know, as well as on our Twitch, so you can feel free to read these at your leisure as well. There's an interesting article on Vox talking about marijuana legalization, and it does have a focus on the U.S., but we are going to talk a little bit about outside of the U.S. as well. And this was interesting to read because, you know, we've all heard bits and pieces here and there, and I wanted to give everybody a little bit more of a, you know, focus on where we stand right now, and sort of a little bit seeing, you know, what are some of the obstacles and standing in the way of just, you know, legalizing marijuana everywhere in the U.S. Let's get to it. Oh my goodness, right? So where is it legal right now? So I have an image here that you may be able to see if you're looking at the visual of this podcast. And as you can see, there are some states that have it legalized. There are some states that have it medical legalized only. They have some states that are medical and decriminalized. There are some states that are just decriminalized, and there's some where it's still illegal. So marijuana has been legalized in 9 states and in Washington, D.C. But marijuana actually is illegal under federal law.
Right. Which has been the weird kind of situation for many states and many people within those states. You know, it's like, well, it's technically legal, technically not. It's technically recognized, it's technically not.
Yeah, pretty much. Now, 13 states have moved toward decriminalizing marijuana, but not legalizing it. So basically what that means is that possession of small amounts of pot no longer carry, criminal penalties like prison time. But possession of larger amounts and trafficking, including the sales for recreational purposes, do remain criminally illegal. And these decriminalization laws actually vary state to state. So some states just attach fines to small amounts of marijuana. Others actually do attach brief jail time. And whether a small amount of pot means 10 grams or 100 grams actually depends on the state's laws as well. And in comparison, for those that don't know, a marijuana joint actually weighs about half a gram. And then 29 states and Washington, D.C., allow marijuana for medical purposes, although, again, their approaches are different state to state. Some allow medical marijuana dispensaries and like home cultivation. Others only allow home cultivation, and a few allow dispensaries, but not home cultivation. And now, right, back to the question of, well, what do you mean? So federally it's illegal, but there's some states that have it legal? What? So the last administration, took kind of a soft approach to the drug, essentially letting these states, kind of legalize as long as they met certain criteria. Hey, don't do too many bad shit and we will just look the other way, right? It's sort of like, okay, you shouldn't drink under 21, but if you're kind of quiet and stay in your room and don't cause a ruckus out on the main streets or something, I'll look the other way, no big deal, right? That kind of look the other way. But Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who now heads the U.S. Department of Justice, has actually pulled back a little bit on the previously lax enforcement. And what does this mean? It means that we may see a shift back to the days when marijuana businesses that were deemed legal at the state level were actually often raided by federal law enforcement. And the industry is expected to grow by tens of billions of dollars in the next decade. So it appears that this kind of legalization at the state level, but not at the federal level, is not going to work, right? Because
not long term, no.
Right, because it's the people. The people are much more in favor now, more than ever in previous times, where they do want marijuana to be legal, right? So
it's like over 60% right now. It used to be like around 13% in the 1960s, and it actually has grown to over 60% now, currently.
Exactly, which is a huge shift. And so something has to be done at the federal level, too. Otherwise, those businesses are going to work in constant anxiety, in fear that they're going to be shut down by the federal government, right? So now let's talk about the states where it is legal, right? How is it legal, right? Like how, when the federal government says no, and then all of a sudden the state says yes, like how does that work, right? What does it mean to be legal? With the exception of Vermont, the states that have legalized marijuana for recreational purposes so far have used what's called a commercialization model, aka for-profit private businesses sell the drug. So the state isn't actually involved, right? Like the government isn't involved. It's all private business who are there to make monies, right? State officials can, and sometimes do enforce some limits on sales, including an age requirement like 21 or older, how much a person can buy and possess at once, the packaging of the product, the taxes, but they themselves aren't selling it, right? Now, pot has a criminal classification, right, at the federal level.
It's a Category 1 substance, yeah, which is the hardest substance, or it's the category that has the hardest consequences, basically. It's saying that this is mind altering, it has a severe negative impact, it can lead to other drugs, etc., etc.
Yeah, it's perceived to have no medical value and a high potential for abuse. basically. And we will actually talk a little bit more about the distinction between the Schedule 1, Schedule 2 as well. But yeah, it's a Schedule 1. So it's like up there with like cocaine and meth.
Which is insane.
Which is, yeah, it's
like
intense.
Meth makes you go crazy and eat other people. Marijuana makes you want to eat tacos.
And cookies.
What the? Anyway, I digress.
So because it's, classified at a criminal level, right, it also has serious ramifications for any marijuana policies, even in states where it says the drug is legal, right? Because in state legal marijuana businesses, they have to function as cash-only enterprises because most banks, as we talked previously in one of our episodes, they're kind of nervous about dealing with businesses that are basically breaking federal law. Right. And especially if you're a national bank, and you're not operating just in that one particular state, you have to deal with federal law. Right. Businesses also can't file for several deductions for tax purposes. And as a result, their effective income tax rates can actually be almost as high as 90%. So when you're a business, you can't deal with banks. You're going to pay a ton of taxes. It's intense, right? To even the barrier to entry is huge, but overwhelmingly, it seems like the trend is that people do want it to be legal, right? So if you know that there's a market, you're going to try to get into it. Now, what are some of the other alternatives to how we can continue legalizing marijuana? That's a good question. In January 2015, there was a report done for the Vermont legislator. And there was some of the top, nation's top drug policy experts and everything. They outlined several alternatives, which included something like possession and growing, but not sales. All right, so you can do it in your backyard, but don't sell it to your neighbors. Allowing distribution only within small private clubs, or actually having the state government operate the supply chain and sell pot. And that report specifically actually favored a state-run monopoly for marijuana production to help eliminate that black market and actually produce the best public health outcomes, right? Because the regulators could directly control prices, could control who buys the pot, and so on and so forth. And interestingly enough, previous research on alcohol, found that states that maintained a government-operated monopoly for alcohol managed to keep prices higher, which is, I guess, not great if you want the alcohol, but it reduced youth access and reduced overall levels of use, which are all benefits to public health, right? So, the conclusion with all of this was that the debate of how to legalize marijuana going forward is just one of the many ways that the political landscape is changing, right? As the U.S. is coming to terms with drug and criminal justice policies that a lot of Americans, experts and Americans, just regular old Americans, consider that are failing, right? The war on marijuana in particular has actually cost the U.S. billions of dollars over decades.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah, billions of dollars.
All right, that's cool.
It's led to a black market for pot that, of course, criminal organizations are using to fund violent operations. It's led to the growth
of massive drug cartels in Mexico and Central America, and has basically made many people's lives in those countries a living hell.
Yes.
And, of course, so the politicians who have been dealing with it since the initiation of this drug war, because there's still plenty of politicians around to this day that were there back then making those decisions. And of course, they don't want to admit they're wrong, right? And well, it's been working for them in a way, right? Because they're not impacted by the opium addictions now that we're seeing, or opioid, I should say, excuse me. And many of the other, drug-related incidences and stuff like that. And they don't want to admit that they're wrong on how they handled it, right? No, of course not. But yet what we have seen is from the legalization in Colorado and many other states is actually a crippling of many of these drug cartels. And they have been going and scrambling, trying to find something else to now sell. Because of the legalization, people can just walk down the street, go to a shop and actually purchase it rather than go to some shady dude on the corner who has connections to a much bigger and nefarious system.
Preach. Right, and this war on marijuana has also contributed to America's incarcerated population, which apparently now stands at being the largest in the world. Congratulations, number one, USA,
Woo!
America.
Yeah! We're number one. We're number one.
It's like, that's not what I want to be number one in, everybody. I'm just saying. So, at the end, it isn't just about, what we're talking about at this point. It's not about choosing, between should we legalize it or should we not. It's about how to legalize it, right? Like, that's where the conversation should go. Which form of legalization is going to produce the most benefits? Which form is going to reduce incarceration? Like either weaken or eliminate this whole black market, and really just minimize as best as possible the negative outcomes of potentially increased drug use as well, right? So now, what's the good stuff about marijuana, right? What are the benefits? There's
eating tacos
and cookies. Man, you're the tacos.
Well,
I would definitely probably be
yesterday,
eating cookies. I'm assuming it's sugar.
Well, do a taco cookie. They have like those chocos, right? They have the chocos, right? The little ice cream treats are like a taco. They're the waffle cones in the shape of a taco. Boom, done.
But yeah, there's a growing body of research supporting marijuana's use for medical purposes, of course. Marijuana can be used for various medical problems, like including pain, nausea, loss of appetite, Parkinson's disease, inflammatory bowel disease, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, epilepsy, multiple sclerosis. And as Evin was mentioning, there's actually a few studies that show that legalizing medical marijuana can lead to fewer opioid painkiller related deaths. Because essentially medical marijuana can effectively treat chronic pain, right, which opioids are commonly used for. But unlike opioids, medical marijuana can't cause deadly overdoses. So it could supplant some opioid use and actually save some lives. Mm-hmm. But here's the crazy thing, right? So obviously, the federal government doesn't actually recognize marijuana's medical potential because it's a Schedule I drug. Because the studies have been so small so far. They're kind of too small. And there's no large-scale clinical trials proving that pot has medicinal value. But it's a catch-22. Because
with everything, there's always a but, and that but is...
You can't...
Not me in yoga pants. That but is not me in yoga pants. That but is another... This is a transition we're talking about, folks. Keep your mind out of the gutter.
The catch-22 is you can't conduct thorough studies on the medical uses of marijuana because the drug's prohibited and you need approval from the federal government who doesn't want to study its potential benefits.
It's that cycle that we all talk about many times where it's like, okay, I need a job because that gives me money, and that money can then be put into buying a car and paying for the gas. But I need a car and the gas to get to work, to get paid, to have the money to purchase the car and the gas. It's the exact same weird freaking circle where it's like, oh, well, we want to, the thing is that we can't do it because we can't research it. Why can't you research it? Well, because we can't do it. All right, something has to give here. You can't just go into this circle of redundancy and start speaking bullshit and say, oh, well, we can't do it because it's illegal, but it's illegal because there's not enough research on it, but we can't research it because it's illegal, but it,
Right, it's like graduating from college and people are like, well, do you have work experience? Like, no, I was fucking in college, yo. Oh, well, you need work experience. Well, I can't get work. What the fuck? Exactly. It's one of those
the wheel
circular.
that never ends.
So as we were talking before, the federal government classifies marijuana as a Schedule I drug, which means that specifically, it's not that the federal government actually views marijuana and heroin as equally dangerous, but Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 drugs, both are described as having, quote, a high potential for abuse, which is kind of a vague description, right? That doesn't really rank drugs into in the two categories as equal or different, right? But the big distinction between Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 substances, according to the DEA, is that the federal government thinks that Schedule 2 substances have some medical value, whereas Schedule 1 does not, basically. So the Schedule 1 substances actually receive more regulatory scrutiny, even though they might not actually be more dangerous. Yeah. And I totally lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. It's rough, right? Because the government is like standing in its own way. It's tripping over itself in some ways or a fashion.
Yeah, no, it's tripping over itself, and this is the kind of catch-22 too, right? Is that ideally you want something in an ideal world, you want something like this industry to be regulated by the government, not private companies, because they're looking for it from a profit perspective. So yeah, prices shoot up, and what they start doing to cultivate, the quality isn't quite there. They're going to try to basically do as little as possible to make the most money. The problem, though, is that if you have the government running it, no, the government itself is not looking to make a profit. It'll do just fine. But it's the people that work for the government that manage these systems, that put in these regulations. They are always looking for a profit. Many a time, right? They either want to keep their job, and so to do that and to not be voted out or have a big business put out a video against them, calling them out for being this horrible person, they're going to bend the knee a little bit. You also are going to get people who are like, oh, well, this big business is willing to, again, help me cover all the expenses I have to put into keeping my job by doing all the marketing, all the advertising, all the, political videos that have to go out, all the email marketing campaigns. That all costs money, right? And so, of course, this big business is going to help give me money, and they happen to want to kind of control the sale of marijuana or of cannabis. All right, well, I'll bend the knee a little bit because, again, it helps me. So that's the issue, or the conundrum I have, is that even though ideally in a perfect world, you'd want the government to regulate it, that way it could control the competition, if you will, and what's happening with the industry, rather than just letting it loose and let anyone kind of control the market on it and having it pretty much go to hell like so many other industries. And so it's really difficult to want to put my faith in the government, but at the same time, it does feel right in an ideal world. And that's one of the things that I definitely struggle with, too, when it comes to this situation. Now, ideally, do I think they should be legal? Or do I think it should be legal? Absolutely. I do, honestly. I have seen the benefits that it has had for people in, with certain conditions and everything else. And also from a recreational point of view, you got to look at it like this. We have alcohol legal. Anyone can do it. You could go to a bar, you could drink at someone's home, whatever. Now we have that age limit, right? The 21 and up. So at least there's that to kind of curtail some people who might not be able to handle it because they're just too young, or, they're not, let's say, mature enough in a way to not overuse it, right? To not abuse it. And now what's funny is that a lot of these people are making that argument against marijuana. Well, look at alcohol and look at all the detriment it has. So, yep. Why do we want to do it to marijuana? But the funny thing is, well, then if you think that alcohol is so goddamn bad, why aren't you going after the alcohol industry? Why are you going after the marijuana industry when that's still basically illegal under federal law? Why are you, for some random reason, attacking it unless there is either some major confirmation bias here, or you have other intents behind it? Like, oh, well, let's not legalize it until we can get enough big businesses behind it to start cultivating it, and then we can figure out a system where it benefits big business and not the people any longer. So I think that's that's what I'm curious on here too. Because yeah, we see this where they're like, oh, well, look at what alcohol does. We don't want the marijuana to do the same thing. Why the hell aren't you going after alcohol then? I mean,
good question.
That's my thing. And again, I have nothing against alcohol either, though I think that has a way worse impact on you physically with enough consumption of it. I mean, you look at people, I don't see people vomiting and barely being able to walk after smoking a joint, but they sometimes will after doing a shot, you know? I don't see people getting in car accidents. Literally, there have been so many studies into it. And that's funny, too, because one of the comments in the article from one of the people that actually are against marijuana legalization actually said, oh, well, you know, there are car accidents and stuff like that. There are none. That person completely spouted utter bullshit on that point, because there is tons of research that have looked into it and went, no, actually there have been no car crashes that have been due to marijuana usage. If they tested positive for marijuana, you know, maybe it was because they were pulled over for another situation. A police officer smelled it and then tested them for it. But there was nothing that had to do with them driving off the road, getting in a major car accident because they had this. Whereas with alcohol, that literally happens every day. Every day.
Oh, yeah, and then there's rehab centers and 12-step, what is that, Alcoholics Anonymous and all this other stuff. And it's like, really? Because if alcohol was so great, why we got rehab centers and all of this other support groups and books and shows all about the bad effects of...
Well, and the alcohol industry is absolutely terrified of the marijuana industry.
That is what I think.
And that is, and it is legit, because again, they know that alcohol isn't just because, oh, it tastes great. They know that. They know it's because people use it in a way medicinally, sort of, right?
Oh, yeah.
You're depressed, you're having a bad day, you need a drink to sort of alleviate that stress. You need something to kind of, you know, kick that negativity to the side. Hopefully that alcohol will help or loosen you up a little bit more and become, you know, less anxious around people
it's
or
a social
things.
Lubricant is what people say.
Exactly right. And so what ends up happening is that, you know, you get the industry who knows all the negatives and really hopes for those negatives to thrive because it makes them money. And now they have something else that's a replacement that is known to, again, because of lack of hardcore research, we can't say too much, but for the most part is known, has actually more benefits without the detriments of alcohol. There is no addiction to marijuana. You know, that's been proven yet. And, you know, there are multiple strains of marijuana, too, that have, again, sort of slightly different effects on an individual that people are starting to learn over time based on piecing things together. Because, again, still is Schedule 1, cannot do full federal research into it. But yet with alcohol, we see it every day. We see, and I've seen, honestly, unfortunately, some of the worst of people under alcohol and not under marijuana.
Oh, yeah. I think... Excuse me. I think, you know, one of the differences is, right, like, I've definitely seen people get aggressive and depressed and, like, all like a spectrum of negative emotions. And then there's a few, you know, happy drunks, sleepy drunks, as it were. Sure. But the destructive effects of alcohol, I've definitely seen. Whereas with marijuana, it tends to be more like just people tend to just be either mellow or happy or sort of, in a way, a little bit more disconnected, if anything, but not like going out and being aggressive or destructive towards somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, you don't hear about a bunch of hippies at a festival after they've smoked a bunch of pot going and, you know, because the band didn't perform correctly or something like that. They're not flipping cars and burning them or, you know, tossing shit out windows. But again, you go to any college football game and heaven forbid if that team loses and you got a bunch of drunk assholes or a rugby match and you got a bunch of drunk assholes out in the audience, guess what? Shit's getting flipped. It's getting set on fire. All this stuff. And it's not only because of mob mentality, which is definitely a real thing, it's because of the impacts of alcohol too, because it doesn't calm you. It just kind of takes away that sort of filter that voice in your head that goes, hey, dummy, maybe you shouldn't do this. Or, hey, don't put your hand on the stove. It'll burn you. You're just like, stove! Ah! And that's what you get. And by the way, for those just listening via podcast, I was putting my hand on a fake stove. So I wasn't having an aneurysm or anything.
You're talking about liquid courage is another term that people use for...
In a way, yeah, it's like
alcohol.
liquid courage, but all it does is just take away that filter. That's really what it is. So it's harder to really comprehend fully. You just kind of do. I don't even think it gives you courage, to be honest with you. It just takes away that subconscious voice that goes, hey, think before you do. And you just do. And marijuana doesn't do that. If anything, it actually, for the most part, relaxes you typically. I mean, again, there are other cases and there's more research to be done. So I'm not saying it's the end-all, be-all, perfect thing in the world by any means. I want more research on it. But what needs to happen then is that we need to change it to a Schedule 2 or less to make sure that can happen. Yeah.
Well, and I wonder, how much research was there done on alcohol? I mean, the Egyptians I don't know if we should give this beer to these to these workers. I don't know about that. It just happened, right? Like alcohol, I feel like has been in all societies in some form or fashion for a really long time. As has some marijuana.
Oh, absolutely.
And there was no research done before that, when Prohibition was around, it wasn't because of research of oh, this is bad for you, stuff like that. So I think it's even interesting that, the government is oh, well, let's just do more research. We don't have enough research. Oh, come on. You don't even need it in some ways, form or fashion, because marijuana isn't a drug that was man-made.
Right. It's not synthetic like some of these other drugs that they've okayed through the FDA and said, great, give this to people.
Right. It's it's naturally occurring, everybody.
Not saying that all natural things can't kill you, right? I mean, there are poisonous mushrooms. You consume it, you're dead. I mean, there are many things like that. But overall, though, it's not chemical-based being put into your body, and then it just so happens at least short-term use it doesn't impact you, but maybe long-term use it does, and it screws up your brain chemistry or something.
Right, and there's no documented deaths from a marijuana overdose, right? But to play devil's advocate,
there's documented oversleeping from marijuana overdosing.
To play devil's advocate, right? It doesn't mean that pot is completely harmless.
Right.
Of course. Mark Clayman, which is a drug policy expert at New York University's Marin Institute, said that, the main risk of cannabis is losing control of your cannabis intake, right? There's going to be, that's going to have consequences in terms of the amount that you spend, basically not fully functional, right? So, at some level, we know that spending more than half of your waking hours intoxicated for years and years on end is not going to increase the likelihood that you'll win a Pulitzer Prize or discover the cure for cancer, right? Which again kind of goes back to the, age mindset article that we were talking about. If you aren't present in the moment and really experiencing and doing things in a particular way to advance towards the goals that you want to advance towards, that could be a potential downfall of spending a lot of your time intoxicated with this drug or any other drug, right? That could be said about anything, right? Anything ever. Playing video games, reading books, right? If you're in a library all the time and all you're doing is consuming content, but not necessarily contributing, as a productive member of society, and that is a goal of yours, then one could say that reading is detrimental. Any which way you could spin a lot of different things like that.
Yeah, basically, it's not the tool, it's how the people are using the tool.
Exactly.
And in this gentleman's case, he's saying basically, people abuse tools all the time. They are abusing all these different things, and it's hard to trust people with the legalization of many of these things because people don't know when to call it and when to stop and pull back.
Right.
But the problem is, too, that we also have drugs out there, again, that are completely legal and yet have the same issue where people will overuse it. There are people who try to drink all the time, even when they're on the job site, when they're at work, they're drinking, when they're at school. There are people that are smoking cigarettes. Those cigarettes actually do have a bit of a positive side effect to it, a couple of side effects, right?
Well, yeah, otherwise people wouldn't.
Otherwise, people
smoke
wouldn't do
at
it.
all.
What the hell would be the point, right?
Right.
Like, it's supposed to help calm you a little bit. It could help you lose weight. It could help you be, less fidgety and things like that. And it gives you something to do, right? So, those are the positives, kind of air quotes on that, because they're kind of loose positives. But those still have the same kind of conceptual idea behind it. And there are plenty of people taking smoke breaks on the hour, every 15 minutes. And so to say this is an example of why not to legalize marijuana is kind of stupid, to be honest with you. It's not doing due justice, because they're not then applying that same logic to all these other drugs that are, especially right now, already legal.
Exactly. And, it is interesting that we look at businesses and the government, right? And we look at them and the news authorities as if they have all the answers, right? But, and so one of the major concerns of people who are anti-legalization is, businesses, especially for-profit businesses, are going to market and sell marijuana to, heavy pot users who may have a drug problem and everything like that, because that's what's been happening in the alcohol and tobacco industries. The companies there actually make much of their profits from users that have serious addictions. Among alcohol users, for instance, the top 10% of users consume on average more than 10 drinks a day. So basically, a small part of your consumer base actually buy the largest part of your supply. And, people are saying, well, that's going to happen the same thing with marijuana. And it's like, right. Anytime you put a product out for anybody to consume, whatever it is, whatever that product is, whether it's something you imbibe or something you wear or something you put in your house, right? You're assuming that people will make a calculated, informed decision that is best for themselves. And that might not always be the case, at which point that's why I believe that you do have to have some other organization, like, let's say, a government that cares about you, to be there to sort of set some guidelines in place, to say, hey, by the way, if you're going to do this is what's going to happen. Be careful. Because otherwise for-profit businesses will never tell you that, right? Tobacco industry was... right, the government was like, you got to put this label on your shit so that people know that tobacco is bad.
Basically, yeah, like, it'll cause cancer, do not do while pregnancy, it'll cause this birth defects, and so on and so forth, yeah.
Exactly, and because in the olden days in the U.S., everybody was smoking all the time. It was sensationalized, it was made, like, sexy by films and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it was amped up because it was introduced into the film industry to then promote out to everyone watching it.
Right, and now we know, like, oh shit, it can kill you. Okay, cool. Like, so, as far as I'm concerned, like, I think there just needs to be awareness, right? And then, let people make the adult decisions that they're gonna make, and however fashion that they want to make them in, because that's all we can do.
Right, you can't babysit everyone and handhold everyone, unfortunately. And it's like, to a point, if the benefits, as Mongo is saying in chat, that the benefits can outweigh the risks, and very specifically in this situation. But he does say too that, I agree, it's not completely without risk. You're still intaking a substance in smoke form. For example, you can, there are other ways of doing it as well, but especially, in smoke form, that your body's not supposed to intake. It's not supposed to intake smoke. That's just the way it works, the way the body filtration system works. And then, of course, you have the fact that, it can potentially impact youth through the development process. Now, again,
Yes.
Ideally, we would still put an age limit on this of, like, say, 21 or something like that, when most people feel like, okay, most people are finished with the bulk of their development process. The mind is already where it's going to be at that point in time.
Which, can be said about really anything, right? Like, we as adults need to make some decisions that affect our children, because we are, quote, wiser and, quote, know better, unquote. Now, we talk a lot about the U.S., but outside of the U.S., this is some interesting statistics. outside of the US, Uruguay, coming out of left field, right? Don't really hear much about Uruguay. Became the first country.
Unless you're in Uruguay. Then you hear about it all the damn time.
Well, it depends on what their news cycle puts out, I guess.
Fair.
But they became the first country in the world to fully legalize marijuana in 2013. Canada, of course, is also working toward legalization. There's bills right now currently navigating through the legislature. Now, while other countries haven't legalized it, they do maintain relaxed approaches.
Ooh, relax. Like they're in a recliner or just sitting back.
To marijuana use and sales. The Netherlands allows citizens to keep and cultivate some marijuana. And the police actually let coffee shops sell marijuana as long as they don't sell to minors. And some other requirements. Spain permits marijuana clubs, and we were talking about that as an alternative, right? An alternative way to legalize marijuana. Although the drug itself is officially illegal to sell. And we hear from some experts, visitors and defectors from North Korea, that there's not really a law restricting marijuana. Or if there is, they don't really enforce it. And one of the reasons that marijuana legalization is so rare in other countries is because countries have international treaties, right, that have established this prohibition across the world. So if a country tried to relax its marijuana's laws, it could be seen that they're acting in violation of treaties, right? And countries don't want to do that because everybody wants to buy their stuff from China. But if you're trying to, seem like you're violating a treaty, it could lead to, right, loss in international standing, credibility. But as more countries and their citizens are viewing this war on drugs and marijuana in particular as failing policies, they are considering reform. So in that sense, Uruguay, and I hope I'm saying that right, and soon Canada, could actually be the beginning of a much broader global movement. So just like you can drink alcohol wherever you go in the world, at the age of 18 in Romania, you could be smoking marijuana on your next vacation, here or otherwhere.
Well, and actually, Touch Me Nancy, who's out of Canada, he mentions too, he thinks it's probably going to be overturned once the current PM is out, which is Justin Trudeau, especially if it's a conservative that replaces him, which is usually how it works out. It's not bashing conservatives or liberals or anything like that. It's just that's usually how it works out. The other thing that's tough too is, of course, you hear these platitudes from a lot of people who are supposedly on the left, but that's a lot of times what they are, is just a lot of lip service. It's a lot of platitudes, but no action actually happens. A lot of times they delay it and push it out until someone like a conservative could come in and completely put the kibosh on it, so that way they don't look bad and they can see, look, Steve, I was trying to put it through and my party was trying to put it through, and then this other party came in and completely stepped on it. So I mean, it's not our fault. We were trying to be progressive and they stopped progress.
And they stopped progress.
So it's kind of tough to say whether these countries will really go through with it or not. But there is hope. I mean, we have places like Acer mentions in chat, like Amsterdam, that is fully legalized there, and you can go to cafes and stuff and hang out, and it's just not a big deal.
Yeah, and I feel like too, in some ways, the more something is not a big deal, in some ways I feel like less people are even inclined to do it. Like there's something about the taboo factor or the like, oh, don't touch the red button, that makes people want to touch the red button, But as long as you're like, whatever, man, like just whatever, just live your life, is less likely to actually lead to worse stuff, if that makes sense.
No, that's totally fair to say. Yeah, you're telling people, don't touch the red button, don't do this, don't do that, and people don't a lot of times like to be told what to do. I mean, there are some people, right? That's just how they function. They want that sort of stability and foundation and structure, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there are people like me, unfortunately or fortunately, depending, I don't like to be told what to do. I get very frustrated with that because I feel like I'm being restrained at that point. And so it creates a little conflict once in a while. But yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see it's going to be interesting to see how people take this, because, what the problem is too, and I'm kind of skipping around, I apologize, but thinking about it, you have that type of mentality on both sides of the spectrum. So there are people saying, don't tell me what to do, we're going to legalize this. You got people saying, don't tell me what to do, we're not going to legalize it. So it's going to be interesting to see, again, where these companies, probably companies too, but where these countries take this legalization, what actually happens to it. But ideally, it really shouldn't be a big deal. I think there should be the proper steps in place. I'm not saying just be like, screw it. Just, hey, you got a bag of weed, I should say, bag of cannabis. Because actually marijuana is more of a derogatory term from the cannabis industry, which we won't go into that because we're running short on time. But again, check it out. It is very fascinating. But yeah, just to see where things go, and if we do see legalization, I think there's enough support now and growing support where it's going to be tougher for people to backtrack on it. As soon as they start giving a little bit of leeway, it's going to be tough for people to say nope and then try to button it back up.
Right.
So especially in the U.S., I could picture it going further, and if it doesn't and they try to curtail it, there being a lot of issues against it.
And I know there was a question too, us living, of course, in a state where it was recently legalized for recreational use. What changes have we seen? What has it been like? That sort of thing. And I honestly haven't. I mean, we only moved here a few months before that happened.
Right.
I haven't seen any very obvious changes yet. I get the occasional news articles that speak about
or the smell of marijuana
things.
as you're passing, or cannabis as you pass by someone's car.
Which, that was there before. In every state.
Exactly.
It didn't stop that. So honestly, I think the only change that I've really seen in the past few months everywhere is vape shops are sprouting like mushrooms after a rainstorm. But other than that, nothing, really cannabis related that I'm like,
no
oh wow, I
madness.
see that change.
There's no reefer madness.
Madness.
There's no hysteria. People aren't ripping off their clothes and trying to eat each other. There's nothing crazy going on. I think some people are just able to function better, whether they go through major anxiety or PTSD and stress, or they go through other, health issues like Parkinson's and stuff like that. Like, there have been video documentations of people who had severe Parkinson's that within 15 minutes of taking a bit of cannabis oil, it actually helped them quell the tremors.
Yeah.
And you almost could not tell that they ever had Parkinson's to begin with.
Yeah, that was incredible to watch.
Yeah, it'll completely change someone's life. And there are people who are so desperate for it because they have, there are people that have children, that get seizures. And cannabis has been known to help with that as well. And the kids can't function otherwise. And all they're doing is constant brain damage to themselves. None of the medication works, but the cannabis oil does work. So, again, there's tons of proof. It's just the willingness. And I think we're progressing in the right points. Again, with guidelines in place, with guidelines and a foundation in place. That's the important thing. I'm not saying, again, willy-nilly, just do whatever you want, but have some structure to it then.
Right. And tax the heck out of it, just like everything else. Mango in chat says that I haven't seen any crazy changes here in Colorado. The biggest thing I've seen is commercials talking about being safe and not using while driving.
Which it's illegal here too in California to drive and smoke marijuana. But it's like drinking, same thing. You can't drink and drive, you can't smoke and drive. All right.
And you shouldn't text and drive either.
And
I'm just going to put that out there. And he also says, I think this is another thing that media ruins with false stories and studies. I think the legalization is slowed by closed mindset people, just like many other things. And, that's interesting, too, because, growing up, of course, all I feel like was told to me or the images and the things that I heard about marijuana around me was, it's terrible, it's a gateway drug, you will go down the dark depths of despair and horribleness and forever if you started, right? And so for the longest time, I was just like, oh shit, like, marijuana is terrible, get me away from it, I don't want to die, right. Like all of these things. And and then when I found out, like, later when I was a little older, and, you know, I found out that some of the people that I actually went to school with, like, were drug dealers, and I was like, oh my God, there were drug dealers, and it turned out that they were selling marijuana. I had the same kind of like a visceral reaction, like, holy shit, oh my God, look at all the crap that was happening around me. I didn't even know. You know, and it actually has been hard for me to get that, like, sort of stigma on cannabis, like, away from my mind, because I grew up with such heavy-handed messages that it was so bad and that could ruin my life, that, you know, even when you know, I saw that person with Parkinson's get better, I was just like, nah. My first instinct was like, holy shit, wow. But then my second one was like, oh, this must be, like, doctored for, like, television or something, you know? Like, I immediately try to justify it to myself, like, no, this is not real. So it is, I think it's also important to understand that some of the people who may appear closed-minded, it's also, you know, you grow up with a certain belief because it's been thrown at you, and you don't really have proof one way or the other, but, you know, people in authority figures have told you so. You start to believe it as real. It is harder for those people to then be like, okay, yeah, no, this one person said it's okay, so it's fine. You know, you have to work a little bit, you as yourself, if you've got those beliefs, but also if you encounter those people, you know, just make sure to educate yourself, right? Look at different sources, do the research for yourself if you want to know. But it's important to recognize that not everybody out there is necessarily just like, no, I want to curtail your freedom to do whatever you want. But it can also be like, well, I was taught that this is the most horrible thing ever, just like cocaine and meth. So stay away from it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Crazy Doc in chat says, you know, that was the same message preached in DARE classes I was a part of in elementary school, and that he feels the same. He has to admit that he has very mixed feelings on the issue because of what he was told growing up, which, again, at that point in time, there was absolutely no research on either. And there's actually more research now than there was back then, but trying to fight that kind of messaging that was then, you know, bashed into your head. This is bad. This is bad. This is bad. And then being told, actually, it's not as bad as people are saying. There's really, like, you know, 90% not as bad as what people are saying, if not more, you know.
And it's interesting because, I feel like I'm always comparing, not that they're the same, but I'm always, like, kind of comparing, you know, alcohol and marijuana, but in terms of the industries, right? Because, you know, growing up, it almost feels like by the time you get to 21, it'll be a rite of passage that you can drink alcohol. And I'm like, there's so many horrible things that I have experienced because of alcohol in my life when I was younger, that to me, 21 wasn't like, oh, I can't wait to get there. It was more like, great, now more people will do more shit around me. Fantastic, right? Like, I had the opposite, I feel like, with the alcohol. And, you know, and it's interesting because with the marijuana, it was like the opposite, right? Like, everyone was just like, well, no, it's going to kill you. Whereas with alcohol, it was like, oh, I can't wait to get there.
Yeah, it's very warped messaging for sure.
So yeah, it's fascinating.
It's the power of marketing. And I think that's the good way of wrapping up the subject is just, you know, it's the power of suggestion, the power of marketing. What we see, what we hear really does impact us. And I think it goes through all the different topics that we spoke about today, whether it's the news cycle or how you view yourself, especially as you get older. And now, you know, we were going to talking about viewpoints and stuff, is the over-sexualization of characters in video games. But we have actually run out of time today. And we do have a special surprise for folks that we're going to announce actually coming up here. But I do want to say that we will be talking about the last topic, the video game topic, actually next week. So we will carry that over to next week and tackle that subject as well as 3 other subjects for next week's show, which will be Saturday, 1 p.m. PDT at twitch.tv/MindMineTV. And do you want to make the announcement, too, of what we're going to be doing?
That was a terrible drum roll.
It's there.
It's there.
It's just a cat purring in the corner. It's cool.
That would be an amazing surprise. All right. So we today at 5 p.m. are going to do a creative stream. That's right. It's a surprise bonus stream where we're going to be taking on how to make an emote for Twitch or whatever other platform you would like.
Yeah, so if you're into digital graphic design, you want to learn more about Adobe Photoshop and many of the other Adobe cloud softwares. What do I want to call it? I guess it's not. I mean, it's like in the cloud. Was it like the whole Creative Cloud
Adobe
suite?
Creative Cloud Suite.
Yeah, that they have. This is the time to do it. So at 5 p.m. today on Twitch, we'll be going through and actually showing you our process of how we go through designing something and then making it digitally and putting it out.
So definitely join us for that.
Exactly. If you haven't followed yet, make sure to hit that follow button. That way you'll be the first notified whenever we go live or whenever an episode goes up. And also, just thank you for your engagement today. To everyone that's been hanging out with us, to you that are listening to us on Podbean or iTunes or Google Play or many of the other aggregators, thank you so very much. And if you really enjoyed what you're listening to or watching, please make sure to follow. Again, that way you get notified when we put up new content, when there's new news that comes out about the channel and the streams and all the different content that we do. And also make sure to let us know your thoughts. If there are subjects you want us to talk more on or subjects that you want us to go more in depth on, make sure to reach out to us. You can whisper us here right on Twitch. You can also connect with us on social media at Instagram and Twitter, which is at MindMineTV. Or you could visit MindMinePod.com and contact us directly through our contact page and let us know your thoughts. What subjects do you want us to tackle? What subjects would you like to see in the future or maybe not want to see? Maybe we're focusing too much on something else. Let us know. Give us your feedback and we will make sure to incorporate it for future episodes.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all the wonderful discussions in chat. We had good conversations today, as always.
Absolutely. It was awesome.
All right. We'll see you guys hopefully later on today. But if not, we'll catch you next time. Bye.